G'day, and welcome to the Seacreatures Podcast, the show all about the amazing animals that live beneath the waves. Each episode, we chat about a specific sea creature with a guest who has spent time and interacted with this ocean animal. Our guests range from marine biologists to underwater photographers, scuba divers, citizen scientists, vets, and anyone with intense passion for marine life. My name's Matt Testoni, and I'm most of the above. And joining me for this episode of the Seacreatures Podcast is Johanna, Sherrill, and we're going to be talking all about the world of the Nautilus. And Johanna is a marine vet, a dolphin trainer, marine biologist, and she's done heaps of cool stuff. But yeah, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed listening to some of your episodes and realizing that I'm not going to be an expert, but I definitely have tons of passion for all creatures in the ocean for real.
That's what we want on Sea Creatures. Let's kick it off. So you're a marine vet who's worked with Nautilus in a veterinarian capacity. But before we kind of jump into that as a job, a lot of people probably don't know what a Nautilus even looks like or have never even seen a picture of one. But talk us through these amazing animals, what they are and how they fit into other creatures and what people who've never seen one can kind of imagine in their head.
Well, I think probably everyone has actually seen the form that a Nautilus has, which is like a spiral. So if you consider looking at a dot in the center of a piece of paper and then spiraling outward, you would probably be close to making what a Nautilus shell looks like if you were to cut it in half. And so it's a gorgeous form, and I think probably a logo in many places. But a Nautilus is actually a very interesting shelled animal. They do have that cool Nautilus spiral shell, and they live in very specific places in the Indo-Pacific. They are really deep water creatures, so it would be unusual for you to see them just walking along the beach or in a shallow water situation. So you would probably have to get on some deep water gear or get into a sea rover and go somewhere around 300 to 500 feet deep to see them doing their thing. But they are in the family, same family as octopus and cuttlefish. If you've ever seen a cuttlefish, maybe at an aquarium, kind of a distant cousin. Cephalopods are, which is the family, cephalopods are really cool in my opinion because they do have the capacity to think and use their brain, especially octopi, but Nautilus may be the sort of the not so smart cousins of the octopus, because in one study they tried to train them to do something and they did okay, but then an hour later they forgot everything that they learned an hour ago. And that's okay. Like maybe that's just protective. But they have this gorgeous shell and they live inside. They're kind of a tentacled creature. And they have like this little area that looks like an eye, but really it acts like a pinhole camera to them so that light comes in. And I'm not sure how much capacity they have for seeing color or whatnot, but they do think they see a little bit of color because they are attracted to some reds on fish and other stuff that they scavenge on the bottom of the ocean floor. So they are scavengers. They're sort of like vultures, really. They eat a lot of dead things on the bottom of the ocean, but that serves a great purpose. And then I think generally the shells of the male are just a little bit bigger than the female. And at some point, I think
how big is a Nautilus?
How
big is an adult?
I think I'm going to look at my notes because I'm not going to remember the exact. And also because you're in Australia, you're going to be thinking meters, and I'm going to be thinking of probably inches. But in general, they can reach 25 centimeters or 10 centimeters in diameter. The ones that I work with, I want to say they were more like 6 to 8 inches for me in diameter. And then I think they also can be even as tiny as 11 centimeters or 4 inches. So it's a dwarf population that is out there somewhere.
Cool.
Nautilus are also considered to be living fossils. They do come from a really long time ago. There was many different species of them. And then there was like an extinction event. And then 3 main species are what we know of today. But I would mention that because they're deep water animals, maybe there's some out there we haven't found yet.
Yeah. What are the 3 species? Tentacles.
Okay, now you're really asking me the hard question. Let's see. So the 3 species, the one that I worked with was called Nautilus pompilius. And then they think that at least since 2011 genetic data, there's 3 of them. I'm going to butcher these names. but Nautilus scroboculatus, and then Nautilus macromphalus, and then the Nautilus pompilius. And I think the pompilius, they think has a couple different subspecies, but
Cool.
I don't know if I worked with a subspecies. I just know that when the collection came into the National Zoo, they were all Nautilus pompilius until proven otherwise. So, and I think the pompilius is the larger of those three. So that's the one that I have a remnant of on my bookshelf. One of my patients who I have to say, when I got the shell back because the patient died, I took x-rays of it. And because of the x-ray is so beautiful, you can see the internal cells, the shell structure, which has chambers. And I think the correct name of this animal is actually chambered nautilus, because they have a very unique way of going up and down the water column by using these chambers to prevent themselves from imploding as they go up and down the depth and experience different atmospheres of pressure. So really unique biology, physiology that keeps them being able to dive up and down the water column and look for food or perhaps lay their eggs, that kind of thing.
Cool, because they're kind of like, they will continue on what they kind of are, because they're such a weird animal, but they go up and down in a similar way to a submarine, I believe, where they can kind of put water into these chambers, don't they? Fill these chambers with water or gas to go up and down. Is that right?
So I think that there may be different thoughts about this, but they call those chambers camerae, and it has a little duct going through the middle of it. And when you dissect them, you can see that duct that goes through each chamber. So the chambers are little houses. So as they grow, they seal, so they're living in the chamber and they seal off the chamber behind them, and then they go to the next chamber. So as they grow, they keep having more and more circular expansion. And so they turn into that pretty spiral shape. I think they did, it's called a logarithmic spiral, if anybody needs to know. And let's see, the buoyancy, it's an osmotic process. And so they remove liquid from the chamber and allow water to slowly refill the chambers by pulling the water out of their own blood, interestingly.
Wow.
And and so the gas, I guess, in the chamber is slightly below atmospheric pressure at sea level. So that's how they regulate buoyancy. Don't ask me to explain that. That sounds like a physics issue. And I never got to observe them doing any of that because they were in probably, 3-foot deep tanks for us, which is probably not really fair in captivity to an animal that's used to pressure changes as much as it looks like 1,200 psi they can withstand, which is 80 atmospheres of pressure. It's crazy.
Which is pretty deep, which is over 500 meters deep. They also, we talked about how they're related to cuttlefish and octopus.
Yes.
But instead of having like 8 arms or tentacles, they have almost up to 90. Is that right?
So I'm not sure that we ever saw one with 90 tentacles, but I think they have different classes of tentacles. And they're not the same as octopus ones. They can't suck onto things, so they don't actually have that adhesive thing, but they use them for different stuff. So like they can detect food, and I think they use them also when there's breeding opportunity. They can grab onto stuff though. Like I've actually had them grab onto my, like a piece of shrimp in my hand. They'll grab it and pull it away. And so I think they do that because they've got like a little bit of a stuff that they secrete that is kind of like a mucus that grabs onto things. But it's not the same as like the suction of a tentacle, which is really cool. I've had octopus as my patients before too, and they really do grab onto you. It's a little spooky. Luckily, they don't try to pull you in the tank with them. They just want something. But yeah, no, they have a bunch of different tentacles. I don't know how many. I'm looking to see, I guess, 19 pairs of digital tentacles, up to 42 appendages visible when observing them. But so you might know a little bit more than me. I did not read how many total tentacles. For me, the ones that we have pictures of, it looks like more like 8 to 10. So they must have been hiding the other ones. Yeah. But yeah, 50 to 90 tentacles, depending on the sex and the individual.
Yeah, I guess it depends probably a little bit on the species as well. Like,
of course. Yeah. So ocular tentacles, digital tentacles, and like mouth area buccal tentacles. So
yeah. Cool. I have
actually done necropsies on them, but I don't remember counting tentacles. That's gonna be on my list next time.
Ahoy! Just a super quick pause to let you know that I'm now doing Sea Creatures as a part-time job. However, this means I need your support more than ever, so please go to patreon.com/seacreaturespodcast and become a paid or a free member for all kinds of extra content, and let's build the Sea Creatures community together. Back to the show. And so the Nautilus, it's related to octopus cuttlefish, but it lives inside its shell. And I think one of the coolest things I was learning about is that like the evolution, like octopus and cuttlefish kind of evolved from a Nautilus style animal and then internalized the shell and got rid of it, which is amazing.
It really is. I mean, things evolving to the environment that they're in so they can do life, eat things and breed and carry on. But yeah, I think I'm so lucky to have worked with all three, octopus, nautilus, and cuttlefish, because they are very different. The cuttlefish do have an internal bone, and I did a study on why they damage their bone in captivity, because all the ones that we would do necropsies on, or which is a animal autopsy, would have bruised and even fractured cuttle bones from bumping up against the sides of the tank when they were either aggressing each other or fighting each other. Or getting
Wow.
scared or worried. But the nautilus, yes, they do. They have that fleshy body that's tucked up in the shell. And they will come out. Actually, they will come out a little bit and kind of extend themselves out when they're looking for things or trying to reach food. But you don't get to see much of the body. And they have a way to pull all the way in and kind of protect themselves like a turtle too. They can really pull in and get behind sort of the harder outer part of the fleshy body that keeps them from being predated upon, I guess, by some creatures. But they can be chased by bigger fish who want to eat the fleshy part.
What does the fleshy part look like? What does it look like when a nautilus is out of its shell?
Well, I mean, I think we've all seen snails. Those are kind of more squishy. Like if you see a snail wandering on the side of your lawn or whatever, they look really squishy. They look like big gummies, you know. But these guys have a lot more structure because we would actually pick them up out of the tank and hold them, because we would need to measure them and take samples of their cell. And I actually would culture the diseased part of the shell to see if we could grow anything out of them. But, when you feel them, they actually do. I'm trying to think of something that you might have felt that way. I guess when you think of a shrimp that you hold in your hand with a shell on, it has kind of a flimsy shell. But if you thought of that shrimp having a little bit thicker, the body feels pretty substantial. Like you wouldn't be able to squish it down. So, and then they don't really, when you pick them up like that, they sort of pull all their tentacles back in. So they don't have much of a footprint, if you will. They kind of compact themselves. And so everything kind of contracts back in. They're very good at pulling in. Again, kind of like a turtle would pull its head into its shell. But as they come out, they do have like a kind of like a hard skin. If it's skin, it feels like kind of like a rough, calloused hand, but it's definitely not squishy at all. They have a lot of substance.
So we've kind of covered what a nautilus looks like, but what do they eat? And then specifically, when you're a vet looking after a nautilus, what do you feed it?
Well, I think when we feed anything in captivity, we do our best to mimic what they're supposed to be eating in the wild. But in the wild, they're on the ocean floor to find and scavenge stuff that might be down there. They do actually eat when a lobster molts off of its shell to get its new shell. They like to eat that molted part. And that was actually important to understand, because that has a certain amount of mineral in it, calcium and phosphate and other things. So we did try to feed them shrimp on a shell and little bits of crab. They do like to eat hermit crabs. I don't know if they eat the actual shell part. I think that might be hard. And then just like a fish that has died that settles to the bottom, they'll go and feed on that. And they'll feed together. They don't like push each other out of the way or anything like that. But in the captive environment, when we would give them little shrimp with the shells on, and actually that was my idea. I told the aquarist, let's not take the shells off the shrimp that we're feeding. And this would be shrimp like you would see at the store. So they're not cooked, they're raw, but they have the shell on them. And then we would I think for the most part, take the heads off and just feed sort of the body of the shrimp with the tail on. But I told the aquarist to leave the shell on just so they would get some of that nutrition, because obviously they need to get their own shell building material, just like a chicken would to make its egg. You got to have the building blocks.
Yeah.
But so they're kind of scavengers and opportunistic predators.
Do they hunt?
So they
Or like how would they eat a hermit crab? Is it just a dead hermit crab, or they're hunting, or is how does it work?
I don't know that. I don't know that answer. I don't know that we get to observe them much in their own environment. At one point, I was talking to a very knowledgeable friend in my industry, also a board certified zoo veterinarian. And I said, one of the places I really want to go is to Palau because I'd love to see Nautilus in a natural environment. And he said, well, actually, they've stopped putting come and dive and see Nautilus on their promotional tourist materials because it's so incredibly rare to see them. You would just have to go too deep. So I don't know how much we've gotten to actually see any kind of hunting activity, but I, of course, didn't get to observe that in an aquarium because we're feeding them. And we would put the shrimp on the end of a stick, so they have to realize that it's there, and they do sense the shrimp in the water or the crab in the water, and they will come over and kind of grab it with their tentacles and pull it off the stick and then swim away quickly to go eat it somewhere else in the tank. So they do find a corner or someplace under some of the furniture in the tank and then make sure that they get to eat it on their own. And they just sort of absorb it into their mouth, and you don't see them chewing or anything like that, but they sort of grab it and pull it into the shell where they are and do that. Their digestive system it does have a beak on it. So when you cut them up at the end, you can actually pull that out, and it does look like a little bit like a bird's beak. And that helps them, I think, to crunch some of the shell or anything hard that they take in. And I guess they can actually rip up stuff, so they can grasp something and rip it off of a rock. So like a crustacean or something like that they want to eat. And then I guess they can kind of get through a certain amount of hard structures that they feel like eating. I wish we could have given them something more, along the lines of what they would eat in the wild, but we did our best, I guess, with the kitchen that we had for aquarium animals.
Kitchen for the Nautilus. Cool.
Yeah, they really are.
And so, like, what is the day in the life of a Nautilus like, and what's it like being a vet and helping them kind of live their life in captivity?
Well, I suppose if they're out in the wild, they're like most wild animals. Their day is let's get something to eat and let's see if there's a mate around. In the aquarium, though, I think I was really lucky to work with Nautilus because there's not a lot of collections of Nautilus in the aquariums that I know of and that I worked at. So I was at Long Beach Aquarium in Los Angeles area, and then Baltimore Aquarium, and neither of those had Nautilus, at least when I was there. So when I was at Washington, D.C. Zoo, we had a pretty small tank. It was a display for the public that would come into the aquarium part of the zoo. They would have individual Nautilus living in the same tank. So, this is going to be much smaller than what they're used to in the wild. There's probably a certain amount of stress there with just instant competition, but because the food is being brought to you, I don't think they ever feared that they wouldn't have anything to eat for the day. But, they wake up, they're waiting for the aquarist to come and bring them a couple meals. So I think they would usually feed them a couple times a day. So I would time my visits so I could be there during the feedings, and that way we could get them out and measure them. And we also weighed them. So we came up with a pretty cool way to weigh them. We didn't want to take them out of the water because obviously they need to be in the water for circulation, and they really shouldn't be out of the water for very long, if at all. So we found a way to have a little cylinder of water, and we would have that with the tank water in it, and that was going to be on one of our scales. And then we would scoop the guy up. We'd have the pre-weight, zero it out, and then put our guy in there, take the weight, and then quickly put him back into the tank. So that would probably be on the list of what was going to happen for a day that I was working and coming over to do research. But other than that, people coming by to see them, hopefully not tapping on the side of their tank. Little shout out to all of you going to aquariums. Please never tap on the side of a tank. It's really stressful to the creatures that live in those tanks in captivity. It's, if you can imagine being inside of a water balloon and having someone, reverberate sound on the outside of it, it's got to be perfectly awful. So
be pretty loud, I think.
Very loud, yeah. And little kids, they find them very interesting. And sometimes they'd be moving around, so you could see them in the water, in the water kind of, they siphon the water in and out. So they almost look like a clam in a way, where they kind of shoot little distances at a time. So nothing continuous. It's kind of like a quick movement, then they stop for a minute, and then they quick move and stop. You can see some of that.
Are
And then
they
somewhere
moving
around,
around all the time, or like they're just hovering in mid-water, or how does that look?
yeah, they'll actually find places in the tank that they like to hang out. So we would have some furniture in there, meaning rocks or other shells, and they would sometimes, it looked like they would sort of semi-attach to that. So I think they have the ability to use their little tentacle like mucus and kind of hang out. So most of the time, either on the floor of the tank, which again wasn't very deep, so maybe 3 feet at the most. And then they would sometimes be sitting on the furniture, like attached to the side of the tank for a little while. But they would move around, like especially for feeding time, they would come over and find the food. They can tell when it's in the water. I do think they have they are able to sense that, and with one of their tentacles that kind of detects odor. And so they would move around a little bit, but they're not. It's not like it wouldn't be like a fish, coming to see, because fish, they sort of keep moving all day, swimming around. But no, they wouldn't necessarily. You sort of have to get lucky to see them swim or come over for food and be, in the exhibit at that time.
How
For
do they
us,
swim? Like they've got like the jet you mentioned where they kind of move, but is
yeah.
that their only form of movement, or do they swim with
Let's see.
tentacles, or like it's yeah, like so I'm imagining they can't just like like move around like a scallop all the time, like in little bursts.
Yeah. I
Must be able to swim
think
normally.
yeah, it's like propulsion. So they draw the water in, and then they push it out to kind of jet propel themselves. But apparently they are pretty efficient compared to a squid or a jellyfish. And I think also they have figured out something that a lot of creatures can't figure out, which is how to survive in water with, well, first of all, it's going to be cooler because it's deeper, but also less oxygen. And they have to figure out how to keep their osmosis, the process that they use for going up and down in buoyancy. They have to figure out how to get enough salt out of the water to do all that. So I think they're more oriented towards really vertical movement than horizontal movement. I've only really ever seen them do very little amounts of that, but for the most part, they figure out how to be efficient in terms of going up and down, so vertically versus kind of jetting around from side to side, more like a fish with a fin would do. So I mean, it's just fascinating to me because I did dive. I've been in the water diving, and I think the deepest I've ever dove is like 105 feet. And you can get pretty easily narcotized at that level, but you can't be down there for more than about 20 minutes. So here these creatures are like living at all this atmosphere, the pressure, devil may care, hanging out. So and
Yeah.
that's just because they have this very unique buoyancy and system of extracting salt and using that to help them move water through the different chamber areas that they built. They build their house in order to be able to do these great things.
Yeah, and I mean, how long have Nautilus been around for? Like, how many hundreds of millions of years?
Well, I think this is what's so cool about them. Well, many things, right? So about maybe 500 million years is what it says here. And the fossil record, I guess, goes way back to the late Triassic period. So you'll have to get a guest who understands all the periods.
Oh, it's too many names, all the periods of
It
time. But
is.
I mean, I think they're older than trees, which is like mind blowing.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think
I'll double
I
check
think
that,
it's
but
cool that they have changed very little over that time frame. I guess there is a whole group of creatures in the fossil record that are called nautiloids. And so Nautilus is, a word coming off of that. I think one of the reasons that nautiloids sort of went out of the fossil record and only the Nautilus were the only creatures in that group that sort of came out and are still surviving is because of maybe predators, pinniped predators, which is very interesting. So I guess pinnipeds being like seals and sea lions type of creatures ate too many of them and caused them to go out of existence. And then, of course, there's all the things that happen in all those periods where mass extinction events and so on. But this particular animal, with its shape and its function and the fact that it can eat carrion, I think probably helped it to survive over these ages. And I think too, it's kind of tough. I mean, the shell in its natural form is is pretty good at surviving impact. I would say in captivity, no. I don't think the shell does very well in captivity. It doesn't develop the same way, in my opinion. But it's a very unique shape that because it's rounded and spiral shaped, it doesn't have any specific edges other than the very end of it where the creature comes out, the soft part of the creature comes out.
Yeah,
So who
and so
knows? I'm
they're
guessing.
pretty tough shells. Like the shells are pretty tough. They can like if you hold one, like you wouldn't break it, or
Yeah, I mean, when they're alive, they feel more substantial. When the shell is dried out after death, I think it can break very easily. I decided to bring my shell to my daughter's show and tell when she was in grade school. And of course, the first thing one of the boys did was break it, which really broke my heart, to be honest with you. But so when it's dried out, it's definitely not as strong. But if you have it in its normal hydrated form with the creature inside, I think it's pretty compact and pretty good at surviving some predators and being a shape that can not necessarily fit into crevices, but definitely the rounded edges are better than having something that's going to be harder to pull into and get away from predators or get into a little tight crevice that you need to hide from somebody wanting to eat you.
yeah. And so I was reading up, you've done a bit of research on Nautilus too, and we're talking about their shells, and it's
Hmm.
called black shell syndrome. So talk us
Yeah,
through
so
what
that's
exactly black shell syndrome is, because it kind of feels like something that a pirate would have.
Yeah, I think we made that name up based on what the shell looks like. But what was happening in our captive population is while I was there, we actually had some babies come in, and the babies were about, let me think here, probably about 5 inches across and in their
Were
diameter, the
they
shell.
from the wild, the babies? Or
They were from the wild. And I think the way that zoos work is they probably go with distributors that capture, but I don't know of anybody successfully raising them in captivity. So I think they have to be gathered from the wild, which is sad, of course, because they actually have a really long lifespan, not in captivity, but in the wild, like 30 years or something.
wow.
So, but most of that time they're not very reproductive. They can't reproduce, so they have to be a certain age to reproduce. And so, even though they live that long time, they're not reproducing that whole time. So really, when you take them from the wild, it's I don't think it's a very good thing. And I think in my industry, in zoos and aquaria, we're starting to realize that collecting from the wild really has a burden, and that we have to be very mindful and intentional about what we're doing there because we can be hurting populations overall. And they're not considered to be, endangered necessarily, but they are considered to be the CITES Appendix 2 protection. Anyway, so we did get them from probably a collector distributor, and I think we got about 6 or 7 of them. And I noticed as I was coming to do my rounds every day that their shells, as they were growing, were a different color than the natural shell. And you could see almost like the rings of a tree. You could see the difference between the shell that had grown in the wild and the shell that was growing in captivity. And as they got a little bit bigger, probably more like 7, 8 inches in diameter, I could see that there were in the center of the spiral where there's a kind of a black pigment. It's almost like the beginning of the shell has this sort of black dot, and then everything spirals away from that in the spiral. And you could see that as the new shell was coming in, there'd be grooves in it. It was almost like it wasn't compacting itself to the regular shell that was there before captivity. And so the grooves were areas of weakness because the shell was actually not continuous, and it didn't have the shiny surface that we're used to seeing on the natural shell. The captive shell was weaker and actually had disease in it that eventually you would see these black streaks, and they could be very deep cracks and um, basically defects in the shell. And so when I started noticing this, I thought, being a veterinarian, I need to figure out what this is because this is clearly not normal and we need to stop this. So we started to look at our record, our database at the zoo, and see if that type of syndrome had been noticed before in the specimen that had died at the zoo that were always looked at after the fact to study them. And indeed, there were several specimen. I think there's probably 40 or 50 in that database of over 35, 40 years. And they all did have evidence of this diseased shell syndrome. And because it looked like black crevices or streaks in it, we called it black shell syndrome. And it's really a form of shell rot. The shell was not developing and it was getting colonized by lots of stuff. And when we did the pathology, we would find these little free living larvae in there, like little worms almost. And then
In the shell, like
in the shell,
burrowing
like living
into
in
it.
the, yeah. So I think what we decided was that it was like after the shell had started to be diseased and almost like started to die off on the outside, these little creatures found that to be a place to live. And so when we found those little worms, it wasn't because they had caused the disease, it was because they were opportunistically moving into the diseased shell and finding that as a place to live, almost like being on a rock on the bottom of the aquarium. So the other thing we found was like fungi and bacteria. And so I did actually culture the shells, but I didn't get any kind of routine bacteria out of it, nothing that I could necessarily treat with an antibiotic or a topical scrub. But we did start scrubbing the shells as a way of treating them. And so we would use just a regular antibacterial or anti-infective that we use for scrubbing for surgery for other animals called chlorhexidine. And so we had a very dilute solution of that. And we would just use light gauze and we would gently clean and remove some of the diseased shell, hoping that new, better shell would grow into its place if we remove the dead stuff. And so we would do that every single day. I taught the aquarists how to do it. They were very diligent, excellent, really wanting to help and do the right thing by these critters. And then we also instituted some better diet, making sure that they were getting plenty of calcium in their diet, because the other thought was, could this be nutrition? So we sort of, being scientists, we sort of broke it down. We're like, okay, water quality, nutrition, infection with something, whether it's parasites, bacteria, viruses, or fungi. And so we tried to do all the tests diagnostically to get into the right track. And then at the same time, institute changes in water quality and diet and all those things to try to help them, because we didn't want them to have this disease. And so I did take a bunch of data and present it to my colleagues, because I wanted to make sure that everybody was aware and actually watching out for this in their collections if they had Nautilus. But also I knew that it was related to being in captivity. And I was hoping that the little subtitle of my presentations would be, perhaps we don't bring these animals into captivity because we're actually causing problems. And even though they're gorgeous to see, we could see a beautiful video of them swimming in the wild instead of here in this little tiny tank that's not doing them any good.
Ahoy! Just another quick interruption to let you know that I've actually just released my first ever, in association with a few others, board game / card game. It's called Big Fish, and it's all about getting our oceans to be sustainable and fun, and it's exciting. It's for ages 10 and up. It's great for adults, great for kids. Check out www.bigfishcardgame.com or check out the links in the show to learn more. Now, back to the world of the Nautilus. How long would a Nautilus live in captivity? Is it the black shell syndrome that kills them? Or
that would be a hard correlation. Yeah, I like that question, because it's the kind of question you have to ask when you're finding a problem in a collected, in a captive animal that's from the wild. But those correlations are extremely hard to make, because first of all, they definitely don't live as long in captivity. And there's could be 1,000 reasons for that. But I don't think that the shell rot killed them in the end. I definitely think it was part of it, but they kept growing. So that's a good sign. They were able to sort of cope. And of course, we were feeding them and trying to control the water the best we could, and keeping, you want to keep the waste out of the water, because that's not helpful. And then all the data that we were getting, we used to try to improve their habitat and their husbandry. In a way, I don't think it's what killed them, but I don't think it helped anything, because having a weak shell, when you're an animal that needs your shell for all kinds of things, buoyancy, protection, ability to grow, they have to put new shell down in order to grow. And so I think it was definitely a complication, but I can't say that it was the primary reason. And we weren't able to determine that with a small sample size in the end. But they did live about the same amount of time as the others. The thing is, though, I think I was the only one that sort of came along and noticed, look at this. This shouldn't be here. Let's study it, and I think before they would just kind of live their lives out, and then someone would be like, oh, look, this shell has black streaks in it, I wonder, and then that was that, instead of being curious. So I think being curious is really important when you're working on ocean creatures, one way or the other. Trying to figure out what's going on with them is important. So asking questions and being willing to admit
Yeah.
mistakes. That's important too. And I happen to have a lot of
Yeah.
people around me that were willing to say, gosh, we're probably causing this. This is not good.
Yeah. So just one more question about the shell. So I'm just thinking about it. So it's got these chambers and it's got a bit of biological material that runs through all the chambers. But then as the Nautilus grows, would it be right to say it's kind of moving to the next chamber and sealing off the old chamber? And then it's like chamber after chamber. And that's why it's that spiral shape. Is that true?
Yeah, I think the the way that they mature is they create a larger chamber for themselves. So it's amazing because they do start out with a certain spiral shell. So I've never seen them hatch out of their eggs, but they must have some kind of beginning shell.
Do
And
they have a larval stage? They must have a larval stage. Or do they born with a shell? I
let's,
wonder if anyone's actually ever seen a Nautilus egg and what it
I
looks like.
know, wouldn't that be so interesting? So the eggs that are fertilized by the male, the female lays them in either one at a time or maybe in batches on rocks, and they actually go to a slightly warmer water for them to develop. And then I think it's 8 to 12 months to develop into basically a 1 inch or 30 millimeter juvenile.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're um, interestingly, the females will do this once a year, but then they regenerate their gonads after this process. So I guess they use up their gonads in this process and then have to grow a new pair. That's pretty interesting. But anyway, they can live up to be 20 or 30 years old, but they're not mature until about half of that time in order
Yeah.
to reproduce. And then really in captivity, I would say 3 to 5 years max from the ones that we studied and just in
How do
general.
they reproduce? Like how
So
do
the male,
they, because like, cuttlefish and octopus have weird ways, even squid have very weird ways, like stapling sperm and different things to the female. But how do Nautilus do it?
yeah, so they actually do, the male actually does have an appendage that he can insert into the female and inject the sperm. So, and she kind of receives it in a certain area, and so they are made for that. They don't really live together or rear the young together, but they definitely have kind of they're invertebrates, but they do have more or less a reproductive cycle that involves the sperm and the eggs getting together.
Cool.
I know it really is.
And before we kind of wrap up, like, have you got any other like cool facts about Nautilus or other things we haven't talked about that you think, wow, that makes Nautilus really special?
Let's see. I think well, we talked a little bit about how they can live at depth and that they can survive coming up from the depth to do other activities, whether it's to lay eggs or whatever it is. And they can do it relatively quickly. And for me, I think that's very unusual. I mean, there's other animals in the ocean that can do that, of course, but these animals actually have air and fluid inside of them that somehow survives this incredible change in PSI, pressures per square inch or pressure in general. So for me, that's really interesting. And the fact that they can start out one size and then continue to grow by creating a bigger house for themselves and moving next door, I just think that's amazing. And while they do that, they happen to have an interior of the shell that looks like pearl. It's beautiful. In fact, that's one reason they get taken from the wild is for that pearly appearance to make jewelry or cups or whatever somebody wanted to make a headdress. But the fact that they have this gorgeous inside lining, so they're kind of interior decorators. And then they decided to be exterior decorators as well because they have these gorgeous stripes in their shell and a spiral shape that is really no other creature that I know of on the planet has this perfect spiral. I mean, this is a geometric
It's
shape.
like a mathematical spiral.
So how the heck do they do that from inside their shell? I think that's just amazing. I think when I took x-rays of them and I could see that the shell in that shape, it was so exciting to me that I actually would give those x-rays away. This is on the actual x-ray film, give them away for birthday presents because I just thought you could hang this in your window and nobody would actually understand how you came by this, but I happen to have worked with these creatures, and I just think that is, for me, I think that's what attracted to me is I had an eye for art and the way that nature does these things. Goodness, look at a hummingbird. Have you ever seen anything like that before? So it's just the way that the creature develops itself, and they're not really considered smart or anything, but somehow they have a geometric mind and a way of just surviving through the millennia. I just find that fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, they're pretty amazing. And I just had a look before. I can confirm Nautilus are technically older than the trees that we see around today.
Good.
I think the trees we see around today, most of them are about, kind of came around 400 million years ago, but Nautilus 500 million. So it's pretty crazy. There's an animal you can see in some aquarium and occasionally in the wild that is been around longer than, the trees that populate our planet. Nuts.
Yeah. I think that's amazing. And if you've ever watched that movie Arrival, where the creatures that
Oh,
are
I love
smarter
that
than us
film.
look like octopi, I would say that they know something we don't know. But yeah,
Yeah.
I feel very privileged to have worked with the baby Nautilus growing into adults under my watch and being able to study them and talk to other people about them. And there's so much we still don't understand because their biology really is semi-mysterious, and we can't go and hang out at 2,000 feet or whatever and watch them do whatever they do. But I think the fact that they can come up from that depth and be in
Because
an
they do it.
aquarium, how
Do they do it in nightly too, don't they? Don't they move up and down in the water column during the day? Because I remember they used to bring Nautilus up from the deep on dive boats on the Barrier Reef as a tourist thing. I don't think they do anymore, thankfully. But
yeah.
something rings a bell. They used to, Nautilus migrate come up during nighttime and go down during the day.
I have not heard that, but I wouldn't doubt it. I think that if you were to bring a fish from the depth that a nautilus lives and you bring it up quickly, it would kill the fish. But the nautilus are not killed by that. And so they figured out somehow in their biology how to do this. I guess there's somebody who thinks that their vena cava is part of it, which is in the nautilus is a vessel that helps to circulate their hemolymph. By the way, they don't have blood, they have hemolymph, which is works totally different than blood, but helps to carry oxygen. And the vena cava, which we have also, which returns blood from the rest of the body to our heart, has perforations in it. So that makes sense because one of the places that you can't suffer much pressure changes in your circulatory system. Everybody knows high blood pressure is bad. Low blood pressure is bad too, but because it has little holes in the vena cava, they're able to adjust to the pressure changes and not die if they come up from the depths. But
Wow.
yeah, I think they do probably hunt at different levels. I mean, it makes sense, right? Because food is going to exist at different levels, so
Hmm.
you gotta be able to hunt and up and down. In the case of these guys.
Yeah, crazy. Well, if anyone wants to learn more about Nautilus, where should they go and what should they do? What's some advice?
Well, there's actually a couple books. I have one of them called Nautilus that talks about some of the biology and so on. Obviously, the internet has now replaced most books, but you would probably have to do a little bit of a deep dive to get into the very detailed things. Perhaps some other places would be discussion forums. Some of the aquariums probably have some websites where you can read about them too, but this is not going to be a heavy duty deep dive into them. But the book that I have is by Dr. Ward, and it's called In Search of Nautilus. And
Yeah.
that one was published in 1988. So that's the one that I looked at when I was doing some of my studies with them. And then there's another one by Neil Landman and Saunders, and that one we had at our library at the zoo. So that one's the biology and paleontology of Nautilus. So I'm old school. I love books. I would stay away from Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. That's probably not where I would get all my information about Nautilus. But you can also go to your podcast and learn all about them because we've had a good discussion about them today. There's still things that I don't understand about Nautilus, but I'm glad that I got
Yeah.
to touch them and they were pretty tolerant actually. The juveniles didn't mind. They have a little sass. They definitely, once you put
What
them
is
back in the water, they shoot away from you. Like, I don't want to be around you.
Nautilus sass? I love it.
Yeah. I would venture to say they have a little personality to them, but I'm definitely biased when it comes to cephalopods. So
I think cephalopods are pretty known to have personality and different traits. So it'd be Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if the Nautilus did have something like that.
Yeah, I mean, they did try to put them in studies to teach them something. And like I said, they have a short-term memory issue, but
How do
that
you
makes
teach a
sense.
Nautilus? Like I just have to ask before we wrap up, how do you teach a Nautilus?
Well, a lot of creatures like that you teach because they want a food reward. So if you want them to be on a certain side of the tank before they get their food, then you sort of, with any training, you approximate things. As a dolphin trainer, I learned quickly that you can't just go from A to Z. You've got to do all the steps in between. So maybe for 2 weeks we would say, okay, I want you to touch this thing with your tentacles, and so you just bring it over to them, and then as soon as they reach out with their tentacle, you give them a reward, usually in the form of a shrimp, and then maybe you hold it a little farther away and they come over and grab it, and then you get, so it's just approximating what you want slower and slower,
Yeah.
slowly over the time to get to the final result. But yeah, I'm not sure that they're super brainiacs or anything, but somebody tried to pair food and a flashing blue light, apparently in a study. And so then they would try to teach them how to respond to the blue light. And then they did appear to react by pushing their tentacles out. But then about an hour after that, they didn't remember the blue light. Maybe they were just bored by the blue light. That sounds like an extremely boring study anyway.
So it's so interesting that like that study is kind of done. I love that, people are studying Nautilus like that. It's just, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like that is kind of like science for the sake of science, which is kind of
Yeah,
cool.
it is. I always get amazed when I would go to listen to my colleagues, the things that they get up to, like whoever thought of this and how in the world. But that kind of thing excites me, that there are a lot of curious minds out there and that they are willing to ask crazy questions that might end up in some way benefiting, hopefully the creature first, but also just maybe a design or whatever. I mean, just studying the design of the shell on an X-ray was fascinating to me, because I was thinking there's got to be a reason for this spiral shape.
Yeah.
Maybe it does have to do with keeping the shell intact when you go under atmospheres of pressure. And
Yeah.
because,
It
if
could
you're,
well do.
yeah, if you're spiraling something, then you have levels of support in a circle that's slowly enlarging. And that just makes sense to me.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
on that note, I think it's time to wrap it up. But thanks heaps for being on and talking about Nautilus.
Absolutely. I hope everyone gets a chance to see them, whether it's in a cool video or perhaps in an aquarium. And remember, don't tap on the glass. They don't like it.
Awesome. All right.
Yeah, and if you're a shrimp, get out of the way.
No shrimp in Nautilus enclosures. Sea Creatures Podcast is hosted, edited, and produced by myself, Matt Testoni. Did you know that I've actually just started doing Sea Creatures Podcast as a part-time job, which means that it's now more important than ever that I could get any support. The best way to support the podcast is to go to patreon.com/seacreaturespodcast and become a Patreon member. Whether it's a free member or a paid member where you get bonus episodes and early access to content, it all helps, and it'll all help the world of sea creatures grow. Music by the talented Dan Musil and production assistance by George McGrath. Coming up next time on the Sea Creatures Podcast, we're going to be talking all about the world of whales. In fact, we're going to have a few cetacean episodes coming up as a bit of an end-of-year cetacean celebration. And if you don't know cetacean, it just means marine mammals like dolphins and whales. So, get excited, get keen, jump on the Patreon. This has been the Sea Creatures Podcast. Over and out.